Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 31st of January, comes to you from London. And the big thing last night was the Federal Reserve really announcing that it was probably not going to raise rates any further this year. So that's how the markets interpret it, and that's obviously bad for the dollar. So we're seeing the dollar in a short-term downtrend here, medium-term turning bearish, long-term still in a bull trend, with upside targets that are quite significant, but hitting resistance here on the point and figure charts. Remembering this is my long-term, my medium-term, and my short-term picture. Short-term downside targets still in place. So it does look like we're going to see a bout of dollar weakness. Looking at the euro, we see that the euro is looking stronger on that weaker dollar. We do still have a downside target on the short-term chart, but medium-term, if we can rise up through the cloud, then that puts us into a more bullish trend on Eurodollar. Against the yen, and the yen is really where we normally see it show up first. The dollar yen has been bearish for some time for the dollar here. So strong yen, whilst there's been quite a lot of political turmoil and uncertainty in markets, the yen has strengthened, and we're seeing that on the long-term chart as well. So the dollar is now bearish against the yen on all three time frames, with downside targets to play for. There is support though, and it'll be interesting to see whether we break that on the 1% point and figure chart. But for the moment, it's bearish for the dollar. Sterling holding strong on that weaker dollar, but we are still short-term bearish for sterling. So whilst the dollar is not looking strong, sterling is looking less strong against the dollar, and we're seeing that against the euro as well. Sterling looking weaker, although long-term it has actually improved against the euro. Against the Swiss franc, we're seeing sterling also just looking bearish short-term, but medium-term still rising. So despite the political turmoil we're seeing in the UK, quite interesting that we're seeing that sterling holding its strength against the Aussie dollar, not looking so good there. Bitcoin still pretty much a basket case, sitting down another 2/3% last night. We're just hovering at this $3,000 level, and so it's bearish on all three time frames for Bitcoin. The US market leapt last night on the Fed announcement, so we saw the S&P up 1.5%, still in short-term bullish territory. The bull trend continues. Just starting to look at the medium-term chart recovering. We've still got some work to do to take out the December high at 2,800. That would be the first signs that we've got a full recovery. We're in this sort of phase at the moment where the market is potentially finding support or finding resistance. If we fail to get above that December high, that will be significant for the market. The Nasdaq was up even more sharply, and here we are seeing quite good signs of support being found on the long-term chart. We do have an upside target of 7% on both these charts, and short-term 7%, 4% and 5%. So for the moment, it does look like the market can recover. The Dow was up 1.77%, it looking strong as well. And here we see short-term upside targets, the longer-term targets not as clear. And the Russell 2000, the broader-based US index, holding fairly steady as well. But flat the last week or so. So we are seeing that it's mostly big caps, which is where the large caps is where the action is. The S&P futures up 0.13% this morning. The Nasdaq E-mini up a further 0.4%, suggests that the US market will open higher still. The FTSE this morning is up 0.6%, so not a massive performance, but short term we have been looking better on the FTSE 100, and the FTSE 250 we're seeing up 0.5%, ticking higher, looking better there as well. The DAX in Germany up 0.5%. CAC Current also up 0.5%. These markets looking a little bit better, but still more bearish than the US markets on the medium and long-term charts. The Japanese market jumped 1.1% last night, so that's looking better. The Hang Seng was up 1% as well. Medium-term recovery on the Hong Kong market is actually looking better and better all the time. We've got an upside target of 16%, short-term 2% and 7%, so we might see some recovery in Asia. China, slightly better news out of China last night, but interestingly, we do still have these long-term targets hanging over us in the Chinese stock market. So whilst we've got a little bit of a short-term recovery, we are just saying that as well. India was up very sharply, up 1.5%, so it's looking better as well. So we are seeing still short-term bearish, but the medium-term and long-term charts, long-term chart really quite clearly staying bullish through all of the recent route, and the medium-term chart returning to bullish, and lots of upside targets. So India still one of the best looking markets. The Aussie market down 0.4%. It bucked the trend last night. So interestingly, we are very flat here. We've got targets in both directions, so there's just a little bit less certainty there. Brent crude is up 0.4%, nudging the $62 level. WTI is up less strongly, but still in short-term bullish territory. Targets are less clear here for WTI, so it'll be interesting to see. But this is the strong quarter traditionally for crude oil in the run-up to the summer driving season. US nat gas struggling at $2.90. Looking straight to gold, we're sitting at 13.20 this morning, so gold pushing higher. We're back into bullish territory here on the long-term chart for gold. We've got upside targets of 29% higher at 1707 and 16% higher at 1530. The current thrust also will produce a target. If we just put that on, at the moment that's 1640, but that target, this column is still in train. We need to break this 1350 resistance. 1360, 1370, and then we activate all these targets, we deactivate the downside target. It becomes a very clear case for gold rising. Medium term, we don't have a lot of action showing, and the short term chart also not a lot of action showing here. Take a look at the 1 minute chart. We've seen gold as high as 1322 this morning. Look at the targets. We've got 1334 is the next stop. That's another 1% higher. And if we look at the 0.5% chart, again we see lots of upside targets, 1327, 1328, 1348 if we can move and activate that. So we need to move to a new high to activate 1348, which would take us right into this resistance area. So at the moment, gold looking very much stronger on that weaker dollar, so that's really quite key. Silver making multi-month highs as well, and interesting looking at US 10-year yields, sank much lower on that Fed announcement last night, 266. Amazing to think they were at 3.2% only a few months ago, and we were already looking at 4% as a potential. The picture has changed very dramatically here on US 10-year yields, and that means of course that German bonds are looking stronger, so the bond market actually looking much stronger than it has done for a very long time, bullish on all three time frames on the German bonds. Looking at the individual stocks, looking first of all at the Nasdaq, we saw a very big jump in the Nasdaq last night. AMD up 19%, that was a massive move. Apple up 7% nearly, so obviously the big bellwether here really rising. Nvidia, which has had a terrible time, up 4%, recovering some of that loss, but that's not out of the woods. And then Facebook came out with stellar results last night, so interesting to see there. We were up 4% before the close, and those markets came out after the close. Tesla up 4%, and we're seeing some really quite big moves there. In the Aussie market, it was more of a mixed picture. We had Zero Limited up 8%, but looking at the downside, we had Sierra Resources down 10%, so that's really moved lower. China, we saw a fairly mixed picture here. Quite a lot of stocks up, some as much as 4%. On the downside, not many stocks down. Taking a look straight to the Indian market, this data all coming from Yahoo Finance. We had Axis Bank up 4%, Tata Motors up 4% as well, so really quite significant. Here we see the live prices coming in, and only a handful of stocks down in India. Taking a look at the European market, the FTSE 100 this morning, we're seeing drinks Diageo up quite sharply, Royal Dutch Shell, Antofagasta, so we're seeing quite a lot of big moves there. On the downside, still the banks, Standard Life, Barclays, HSBC, we're seeing all sort of down. Standard Life down 4.6%, so quite negative there. Looking at the FTSE 250 and the Stock 600, just the Euro Stock 600, we got easily up 9%. So quite a big jump there. And then on the downside, we're seeing Swatch Group down 6%. So we are seeing still some pretty big falls. That's a massive fall there for Swatch, and Nokia down 5.6%. So they're unwinding some of that counter trend move as well. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.